At 3 o'clock in the morning on January 11th, a residential security camera system, located exactly 4 blocks away from the home of Nancy Guthrie, froze completely for 15 minutes. This isolated technical malfunction appeared to be a mundane drop in the local wireless network that suburban residents experience all the time. The brief moment of digital static held a far more sinister, meaning that local authorities entirely overlooked during their initial assessments. How does a seemingly harmless internet connectivity issue connect to the total disappearance of an 84-year-old woman just 3 weeks later? You must ask yourself if an invisible digital predator was already testing the boundaries of the neighborhood security grid long before they ever stepped foot on the property. We are going to examine the unseen electronic threads, tying a simple router failure to an active federal kidnapping investigation. If you want to piece together these hidden digital clues alongside us, subscribe to Murder Mystery File as we unravel the invisible data of this ongoing case. Let us examine the quiet atmosphere of the Catalina Foothills through the eyes of the people sleeping just down the street. The residents of this affluent neighborhood place their absolute trust in the glowing rings of infrared security cameras mounted beside their front doors. They rely on the constant stream of notifications pinging their mobile devices to assure them that their physical boundaries remain perfectly secure against the outside world. During the early weeks of January, several neighbors started experiencing highly specific and deeply unsettling electronic anomalies inside their own homes. According to local television news reports, parents sleeping in a nearby house woke up to the sudden sound of harsh static emitting from their digital baby monitor. They likely assumed it was just a passing truck or a faulty electrical wire causing the sudden disruption in the local radio frequency. Other residents living within a short walking distance filed minor incident reports with the Pima County Sheriff about their residential wireless networks repeatedly dropping offline. These disruptions always seemed to occur during the darkest and quietest hours of the early morning, when the streets were entirely empty. These people simply unplugged their routers in the dark and went back to sleep, comfortably believing the temporary blackout was just a standard service interruption. They had absolutely no reason to suspect that the invisible radio waves floating through their living rooms were actively being choked by a foreign device. They could not see the shadowy figure standing just beyond the illuminated edges of their manicured lawns, slowly suffocating their digital lifelines to measure their response times. This neighborhood is specifically designed to provide peace of mind to vulnerable populations, including elderly residents who require specialized medical monitoring to survive. Nancy Guthrie fit this demographic perfectly, relying on a surgically implanted pacemaker that continuously transmitted her vital cardiovascular data through the local wireless gateway. The quiet streets and overlapping security lenses create an illusion of an impenetrable fortress, shielding the medically fragile from the unpredictable threats of the city. This false sense of absolute security is exactly what allows a patient predator to quietly map the invisible vulnerabilities floating through the cold desert air. The final weekend of January began as a perfectly ordinary sequence of domestic routines for the Guthrie family. At 9:50 on the evening of January 31st, Tommaso Cioni safely drove his mother-in-law back to her quiet residence after a family dinner. The exterior surveillance cameras faithfully recorded the vehicle pulling into the concrete driveway, capturing the exact moment the automated garage door sealed her safely inside the house. The electronic perimeter was fully armed. The heavy wooden doors were physically locked, and the interior environment remained entirely undisturbed as the night deepened around her. Sometime during the early morning hours of February 1st, the outermost layer of this secure domestic environment was quietly and efficiently dismantled by an unseen force. The front doorbell camera guarding the primary entrance abruptly lost its connection to the remote server, plunging the immediate digital feed into absolute blackness. This was not a localized power outage, because the surrounding streetlights and the internal electrical systems of the house continued to function perfectly, without any interruption. At that exact same moment, the life-saving medical pacemaker implanted inside her chest suddenly stopped transmitting its continuous stream of biological data to the remote healthcare servers. When the family realized she had missed her scheduled virtual church service on Sunday morning, they arrived to find a completely silent and empty home. The local law enforcement officers who responded to the initial missing person call treated the blacked-out camera as the exact starting point of the physical crime. They looked at the empty physical space and the severed digital connection, assuming the tragedy began and ended in that specific, unrecorded moment on the porch. The authorities treated the disappearance as an isolated incident occurring in a vacuum, completely ignoring the whispering digital anomalies from the preceding weeks. They were looking at a single broken thread, without realizing it was part of a massive web, meticulously woven across the entire community. They failed to recognize that the silent camera was merely the final stage of a highly coordinated operational timeline that had been running for weeks. The Federal Cyber Division pulled the neighborhood network logs and meticulously compared them to the recovered surveillance fragments from the surrounding homes. On January 11th, the exact night the local parents heard the terrifying static on their baby monitor, a neighbor's security camera captured a chilling silhouette moving through the darkness. The dark figure was not simply walking down the street to scout for unlocked vehicles or open windows in the quiet suburban neighborhood. This unknown individual was actively coordinating their physical movements with the activation of a localized radio frequency jamming device. I want you to place these two separate pieces of information side by side on a calendar and look closely at the timelines. The exact minutes when the neighborhood wireless routers inexplicably froze match perfectly with the exact timestamps of this masked figure passing by those specific houses. The suspect was conducting a highly calculated dry run to test the effective radius of their electronic suppression equipment right in the middle of a sleeping community. This was not a random technological glitch, but a sophisticated rehearsal for a targeted digital blackout that went completely unnoticed by the local authorities. The shadowy figure returned on January 24th, intentionally utilizing the bright illumination of the lunar cycle to meticulously map the remaining infrared camera blind spots. The intruder stood on the edges of the manicured lawns, projecting a shadow perfectly aligned with the moonlight, while quietly suffocating the digital transmission lines of the surrounding properties. The neighbors who groggily restarted their routers at 3 in the morning were entirely unaware they were participating in a terrifying live experiment. The perpetrator was learning exactly how long it would take for a completely blinded security network to reboot and alert the homeowners to a potential perimeter breach. This chilling realization fundamentally transforms the entire scope of the active federal investigation from a simple missing person case into a massive premeditated digital assault. The authorities are now forced to confront the terrifying reality that this meticulous operator spent 3 full weeks preparing the ultimate technological trap for one specific resident. If you want to follow the digital breadcrumbs of this ongoing federal investigation as they emerge, please subscribe to Murder Mystery File to join our active case analysis. The chilling execution of these dry runs proves the perpetrator possessed the advanced technical capability to isolate any house in the entire Catalina Foothills subdivision. They had the power to plunge any family into absolute digital darkness and execute a flawless home invasion without triggering a single automated alarm. This incredible level of control forces us to ask the most disturbing question currently hanging over the entire federal investigation. If this highly sophisticated predator had the entire wealthy neighborhood at their mercy after successfully mapping the surveillance grid, why did they specifically choose to target an 84-year-old woman living quietly at the end of the street? For several agonizing days, local detectives desperately searched for a traditional motive by interviewing family members and examining personal financial records for any signs of hidden animosity. They were actively looking for a classic physical motive, while completely missing a terrifying new category of digital vulnerability that was transmitting continuously from inside the house. The medical implant regulating the heartbeat of the victim was explicitly designed to be a miraculous piece of life-saving healthcare technology. The device communicated seamlessly through a wireless home gateway, ensuring her cardiologists received a constant stream of vital biometric data to monitor her fragile health status. This continuous transmission of unencrypted medical data essentially acted like a brilliant digital lighthouse, constantly sweeping across the dark ocean of the neighborhood internet traffic. Anyone possessing a basic radio frequency scanner and sitting in a parked vehicle nearby could easily detect this rhythmic pulse of highly specific biological information. The federal investigators have now officially confirmed that the pacemaker lost connection simultaneously with the external doorbell camera during the early morning hours of February 1st. They are still actively investigating whether the medical device was simply caught in the PRTO, wide radius of the signal jammer, or if it was the primary target of the electronic attack. The terrifying possibility remains that the perpetrator did not randomly stumble upon a vulnerable elderly victim while testing their equipment on the neighborhood network. The continuous broadcast of the medical telemetry might have served as a glowing digital beacon that actively drew the predator directly to her specific doorstep. We are entering an era where our own biological survival mechanisms can be intercepted and exploited by unknown individuals waiting silently in the dark. The investigation slowly peeled back the layers of her digital footprint, revealing just how exposed her physical location actually was to anyone listening on the right frequency. The Federal Cyber Division analysts began tracing the network architecture of her home to understand how the medical gateway interacted with the surrounding civilian surveillance grid. They discovered that the medical transmission utilized a remarkably standard wireless protocol that lacks the robust military-grade encryption required to truly protect sensitive physiological data. This glaring technical oversight implies that the intruder did not need to execute a complex network breach to identify the presence of a medically fragile individual inside the residence. They only needed to passively monitor the local airwaves during their late night dry runs to compile a comprehensive digital map of the weakest targets in the area. The authorities must now determine if the suspect intentionally mapped the neighborhood specifically to locate vulnerable medical devices transmitting in the clear night air. The entire concept of a safe residential environment shatters when you realize your own heartbeat is broadcasting your exact physical location to anyone carrying a sophisticated scanner. The investigators slowly realized that the traditional criminal profile of a violent home invader completely failed to align with this incredibly specific method of target selection. The suspect possessed the technical knowledge to intercept medical telemetry and the tactical patience to conduct weeks of localized electronic warfare testing. Yet this same highly calculated individual chose to execute a physical abduction that fundamentally contradicted the clean and sterile nature of their digital preparation. The forensic technicians processing the concrete porch discovered a localized pool of human blood that definitively matched the genetic profile of the missing elderly woman. This biological reality completely shatters the illusion of a flawless phantom hacker operating strictly behind the safe glow of a computer screen. The investigators are left staring at a crime scene that bridges the terrifying gap between a bloodless cyber attack and a deeply violent physical confrontation. The physical blood left exposed on the cold concrete porch creates a profound psychological contradiction within the established profile of the unknown suspect. A specialized hacker who spends weeks meticulously testing radio frequency interference usually seeks to exploit digital vulnerabilities for anonymous financial gain or remote data extortion. They typically operate from a safe distance to steal cryptocurrency or drain bank accounts without ever needing to physically touch their carefully selected victims. The act of manually abducting an 84-year-old woman requires a level of physical aggression and direct personal risk that completely violates the standard cybercriminal methodology. The local authorities and federal profilers are struggling to reconcile the brilliant technological execution of the digital blackout with the messy biological reality of the physical extraction. The competing theories are beginning to collide and fracture as the investigation pushes deeper into the 7th week without recovering a single verifiable sighting of the victim. If the primary objective was simply to execute a high-tech ransom operation, the physical removal of an elderly woman with a severe cardiac condition introduces an unacceptable level of operational liability. The immense physical strain of moving an uncooperative or incapacitated adult through the dark desert terrain significantly increases the probability of a fatal medical emergency. The suspect would be acutely aware that their high-value target possessed a fragile cardiovascular system because they likely intercepted her continuous medical telemetry. If you want to dive deeper into the psychological contradictions driving these complex criminal profiles, please make sure to subscribe to Murder Mystery File. We carefully analyze the conflicting evidence that often derails these intricate federal investigations and keeps these chilling cases unsolved for months. The presence of the biological fluid on the porch strongly suggests the extraction did not proceed with the silent precision the perpetrator originally anticipated. The physical trauma indicates a chaotic struggle or a sudden catastrophic medical event that forced the tactical operator to rapidly alter their meticulous operational timeline. This sudden injection of physical violence into a purely digital environment forces the federal agents to question the true motive behind the entire targeted operation. The investigators must consider the terrifying possibility that the suspect is not a financially motivated hacker, but a highly organized physical predator utilizing modern technology as a hunting tool. This chilling hypothesis suggests the intruder uses sophisticated signal jammers and passive network scanners specifically to facilitate violent interpersonal crimes against highly vulnerable targets. The conflicting evidence leaves the entire task force suspended in a valley of uncertainty, unable to definitively categorize the exact nature of the monster they are actively hunting. They are tracking an individual who possesses the intellect to blind a smart neighborhood, and the sheer physical brutality to drag a bleeding woman into the desert night. The standard criminal templates simply do not apply to an adversary who perfectly blends advanced electronic warfare with raw physical aggression. The search teams are looking for a technological ghost, while the forensic laboratories are simultaneously processing the grim biological reality of a violent physical assault. These irreconcilable clues seem destined to keep the investigation permanently paralyzed until the federal technicians applied a specialized enhancement algorithm to the recovered surveillance fragments. The digital analysts finally managed to clarify a bulky shape strapped securely to the back of the shadowy figure captured on the neighbor's camera. This specific piece of nylon equipment completely changes our understanding of the crime and points toward a motive far darker than a simple home invasion. The enhanced digital magnification of the shadowy figure revealed a heavy 25-liter nylon backpack that completely contradicted the typical profile of a rapid home invasion. Federal investigators are now carefully considering a deeply unsettling theory regarding the specific contents of that bag and the true nature of this targeted extraction. The Behavioral Analysis Unit is exploring the horrifying possibility that the perpetrator did not choose their elderly victim because of personal animosity or financial greed. They are evaluating the theoretical premise that the attacker simply drove slowly through the affluent neighborhood while operating a portable radio frequency scanner concealed inside that recreational backpack. The suspect was likely hunting for unsecured local area networks that actively broadcast sensitive physiological data from vulnerable residents who believed they were perfectly safe behind locked doors. This theory suggests the intruder intercepted the unencrypted biomedical telemetry constantly radiating from the cardiovascular implant and immediately recognized the presence of a medically fragile target living at that exact address. The victim became the primary focus of this elaborate operation merely because her biological security system represented the most glaring digital vulnerability on the entire suburban street. You must consider the chilling implications of an anonymous predator weaponizing the very medical technology that was surgically implanted to preserve a human life. Federal cyber experts suspect the perpetrator mapped the specific frequency of the cardiac device during those quiet January test runs and calibrated their portable jamming equipment to perfectly neutralize that exact signal. This terrifying hypothesis means the victim was not hunted for who she was, but rather she was selected entirely because her digital heartbeat was loudly echoing across the unprotected neighborhood frequencies. If you are sitting at home right now wondering how many invisible signals are currently transmitting your personal health data into the dark street outside, you are grasping the true horror of this situation. The federal authorities are actively investigating this scenario where a sophisticated technological stalker essentially utilized a digital stethoscope to listen through the brick walls of the Catalina Foothills community. We must ask ourselves if this operator is part of a new breed of criminal who specifically targets the elderly by exploiting the wireless medical devices they rely on for daily survival. This chilling concept requires us to completely reevaluate the fundamental definition of a home. Invasion in an era where our biological rhythms are constantly tethered to external cloud servers. If you find this exploration of modern technological vulnerabilities as deeply disturbing as we do, please hit the subscribe button so Murder Mystery File can keep you continuously informed on this specific threat. The authorities are currently operating under the assumption that the suspect possessed the technical sophistication to distinguish between a standard smart television connection and a critical medical monitoring gateway. They are analyzing the psychological profile of an individual who possesses the cold calculation to silently silence a digital heartbeat before physically breaching the physical sanctuary of a private home. The timeline of those quiet weeks in January suddenly transforms from a series of random network errors into a highly systematic and predatory stalking campaign utilizing advanced electronic warfare tactics. The realization that an unseen predator was patiently sitting in the darkness and analyzing the cardiovascular rhythms of an 84-year-old woman completely shatters the illusion of suburban safety. The investigation is no longer simply looking for a violent intruder who kicked down a door in the middle of the night to grab a valuable asset. They are hunting a sophisticated data predator who recognized a vulnerable digital pulse and methodically planned a flawless extraction that left the local police department completely paralyzed for weeks. The sheer volume of preparation required to execute this localized blackout demonstrates a terrifying commitment to a crime that yielded absolutely no apparent financial reward or public recognition. The profound disconnect between the high-tech methodology and the deeply personal nature of a physical abduction continues to frustrate the seasoned federal profilers assigned to this complex mystery. They are attempting to understand why someone would deploy military-grade frequency suppression technology simply to remove a medically fragile grandmother from her secure residential environment. The resolution of this psychological paradox might ultimately provide the exact key required to unlock the identity of the masked individual who walked away with an impossible secret. As the federal task force continues to dissect the invisible data streams from that fateful Sunday morning, the physical reality of the situation remains agonizingly unresolved for the waiting family. We have now entered the 7th agonizing week of this continuous federal deployment, and the authorities remain officially entrenched in an active missing persons investigation, without a definitive geographical search radius. The sprawling desert landscape of the Catalina Foothills continues to be subjected to rigorous physical inspections by specialized canine units and advanced ground-penetrating radar systems. However, the most critical battles of this ongoing investigation are currently being fought inside the sterile, digital laboratories of the Federal Cyber Division rather than on the sun-baked physical terrain. The technical analysts are painstakingly reconstructing the corrupted telecommunication logs from the entire month of January to isolate the specific origin point of the localized frequency interference. They are attempting to trace the microscopic electronic footprints left behind by the mobile jamming device as it moves silently through the residential neighborhood during those early morning dry runs. The family members are forced to endure a suffocating state of emotional suspension while they wait for supercomputers to decipher the invisible radio waves that might explain the sudden absence of their loved one. The authorities are currently urging anyone residing in the greater Pima County area to immediately report any historical instances of sudden and unexplained wireless network failures occurring during the late-night hours. They have established a dedicated federal tip line to process these specific civilian reports, hoping to identify a broader geographical pattern of electronic surveillance that might indicate the suspect was testing their equipment elsewhere. This massive data collection effort highlights the profound difficulty of tracking an adversary whose primary weapon is the deliberate erasure of standard forensic evidence. The investigators are essentially trying to capture a shadow by measuring the specific areas where the light suddenly failed to shine during those crucial winter weeks. As the search drags on into the spring months, the task force must confront two profoundly disturbing questions that continue to evade any logical or scientific resolution. The first unresolved inquiry directly addresses the safety of the broader community and the terrifying potential for a repeating pattern of technological predation. If the suspect successfully utilized this method to identify and extract a vulnerable target without detection, are those brief network drops in other neighborhoods actually the silent markers of their next impending operation? The authorities must urgently determine if the predator has already moved on to a new hunting ground and is currently scanning the dark streets for another unencrypted medical device to exploit. The second haunting question brings us back to the chilling physical evidence discovered on the concrete porch immediately following the catastrophic electronic blackout. The forensic teams still cannot definitively ascertain whether the cardiovascular monitor ceased transmitting because the localized jamming device successfully overwhelmed the medical gateway router. The alternative explanation requires us to consider the horrifying possibility that the device fell silent because the victim suffered a fatal physical trauma right at the threshold of her own home. The biological fluid recovered from the scene strongly implies a chaotic physical struggle occurred precisely at the moment the digital shield was forcefully ripped away from the residence. The investigators are desperately hoping that the medical device manufacturer can eventually recover a tenor-a-day fragmented data packet that will finally clarify the exact nature of that sudden cardiovascular termination. Until those corrupted digital files yield a definitive answer, the physical search teams are effectively operating completely blind across thousands of acres of unforgiving desert terrain. The local authorities, who initially dismissed the disappearance as a simple case of a wandering senior citizen, are now dealing with the heavy consequences of their procedural negligence. They are forced to watch as federal agents slowly attempt to rebuild the contaminated crime scene. Using the microscopic fragments of data they managed to salvage from the surrounding servers. The active pursuit of this technological phantom continues to push forward relentlessly, but the investigation remains permanently anchored to the heavy silence of that missing 84-year-old woman. The standard wireless router sitting quietly in the corner of your living room might actually be functioning as an open digital window for anyone possessing the right surveillance equipment. We often assume that establishing a basic password on our home networks provides an adequate layer of protection against the unseen threats lurking on the global internet. What this case teaches us about the vulnerabilities of modern medical technology is that the most dangerous predators might actually be parked right outside your physical front door. The proliferation of connected healthcare devices has created a terrifying new landscape where our most sensitive biological functions are continuously broadcast through the air, using highly susceptible commercial radio frequencies. It is absolutely imperative that you proactively secure your residential networks by implementing advanced encryption protocols and immediately changing the default manufacturing passwords on every connected device in your home. You must critically evaluate the transmission settings of any specialized medical monitors, digital baby cameras, or automated security systems that continuously exchange data with remote cloud servers. If your local internet connection inexplicably drops during the quietest hours of the night, you should never blindly assume it is simply a routine service interruption from your local provider. This investigation proves that an unexplained network failure could actually represent the very first phase of a highly coordinated and localized electronic assault against your physical sanctuary. The authorities emphasize the critical importance of utilizing hardwired connections for any vital security infrastructure to completely eliminate the risk of remote frequency jamming or passive signal interception. We must collectively adapt to this rapidly evolving threat landscape by treating our digital perimeters with the exact same level of vigilance we apply to our physical deadbolts and heavy wooden doors. This complex technological mystery serves as a permanent and chilling reminder that the convenience of wireless connectivity often comes at a devastating cost to our personal physical safety. We inevitably return to the haunting image of that quiet January morning when a nearby family woke up to the sudden sound of unexplained static echoing from their digital nursery monitor. That brief 15-minute interruption of their wireless network was the only warning the neighborhood ever received before the invisible predator perfectly executed their flawless extraction 3 weeks later. The Federal Cyber Division continues to dig through the contaminated server logs in a desperate attempt to find the missing digital thread that will finally unravel this terrifying technological puzzle. We are absolutely committed to tracking every single development in this unprecedented federal investigation, and we will immediately report any breakthroughs regarding the recovered medical telemetry or the biological evidence. Please ensure you subscribe to Murder Mystery File so you do not miss our upcoming updates as the authorities continue their relentless pursuit of this highly sophisticated digital phantom. You must ask yourself if the federal agents will ever successfully reverse engineer the localized blackout, or if the perpetrator truly created an unsolvable crime by weaponizing the emptiness of the digital void. The tragic reality of this active case ensures that the missing minutes from that fateful Sunday morning will continue to cast a long and terrifying shadow over the entire Catalina Foothills community. The next time you notice the red recording light on your exterior security camera suddenly blink out in the middle of the night, you might find yourself wondering who exactly is standing in the darkness just beyond your lawn.